player 150 last year would not be nearly as good as player 150 in this year's class, but the players that went 1 through 10 last year are way better than the players that are going 1 through 10 this year.
This time, and he joins us on the Yuengling Guest Hotline. Field, what's up?
Hey, good to talk to you guys. I'm just curious, because of the short notice, any chance that I'm going to be getting a Yuengling sent my way? I was mostly working on coffee for the afternoon, but Yuengling sounds a lot better than this double espresso shot I'm about to pound after this interview.
I'll tell you what, we can probably make that happen. Do you know that they are finally in Illinois? Did you know that?
Had it taken that long? I mean, that's like iconic, one of the world's oldest beers, it feels like. At least in my own brain it is. But I've helped keep the Yuengling business alive for a long, long time. I've done my fair share to contribute to their thriving success.
Those of us that have ever had it have only had it when we're by you guys, out east. And
Pennsylvania.
You know it's great, and now it's finally here in Illinois. So we are excited, and I think we'll probably try to get a 6-pack or something sent to you. First of all, here's the other thing real quick. How is your shoulder?
Shoulder's getting there. It's funny. I'm medically cleared after tearing my labrum and dislocating it back in August. The truth is that between relative inactivity, because we are finally experiencing some good weather here in Connecticut, but it's like the first time we've topped 40 degrees in months here. So I haven't had a lot to do outdoors anyways. And just the fact that I'm getting old, it's still stiff. But you know what? If the Cubs needed me to throw 1/3 of an inning and allow under 25 runs, I think I'm capable of doing that.
Probably do it. Yeah, maybe hit 62 on the radar gun. We'll see how that goes.
Oh my goodness!
All right, so we're preparing around these parts for a lot of debate in the 6 weeks or so we have until the draft when it comes to what to do at 10, specifically about one position and one player, and that's Ashton Genty. And this has got nothing to do with the player himself, and I'm sure he'll be just fine and maybe even great. I term these things as luxury items when you're going after running backs. And, the Ravens and the Eagles and the Lions can afford to shop at Louis Vuitton and get past security. The Bears cannot. So I am curious your thoughts, even with what they've done, as they've gone out and they've addressed some of their deficiencies across their O&D line. As you start to think big picture and you start to think position groups, your thoughts on running back, tight end, and Dionne had said in your latest mock, you did mock Tyler Warren to them. What should they be thinking as the draft approaches and they get near the clock at 10?
Yeah, probably in a perfect world. If you could just imagine a position without and knowing that you're picking 10th. And probably not making a consequential move up the board because you're down some draft capital from some trades that I would deem worthwhile. But knowing where you are, in a perfect world, maybe it would be another pass rusher. Maybe it would be even more offensive line support because while you now go 5 deep that you trust, as we know, this league is about depth of talent, not just along the offensive line, but along the defensive line. The very great teams are able to survive that. The Philadelphia Eagles, not just because they're champs, but because of their prolonged period of success, have shown us that there is no such thing as too much depth along the offensive or defensive line. When you look a little bit closer at this year's draft class, I do think it creates some interesting conversations because I believe there are probably 2 offensive linemen that most people believe around the NFL have a very good shot to go inside the top 10, or let's call it 10, including the Bears. That would be Will Campbell from LSU and Armand Membu from Missouri, who had 2 very different arcs to their draft trajectory. Will Campbell was a day one starter at LSU, protected for Jaden Daniels for 2 seasons. We've known about him since he was a true freshman day one. I have held my ground on Will Campbell despite his moderate arm length. I think this guy is a top 10 pick every day of the week. Armand Membu from Missouri has been starting for a long time as well, but really soared this year compared to where he was in 2022 and 2023. Beyond that, I think there are players that are justifiable number 10 overall picks at either offensive tackle or perhaps pass rusher for Chicago. I would just say, just in taking general surveys of scouts and evaluators around the league, there's not as much of a consensus of if those 2 guys are off the board, here is the obvious name that the Bears at pick number 10 would have to attack at number 10. So I think this draft might influence how that 10th pick goes relative to what it might look like in a different year because The reality of 2025's draft versus 2024 is 2025 is about the depth of the draft. 2024 is about the star power. Like my board last year, player 150 last year would not be nearly as good as player 150 in this year's class. But the players that went 1 through 10 last year are way better than the players that are going 1 through 10 this year if you took them as a composite group.
So you mentioned there aren't obvious names would be that next choice at either O-line. Are you saying the same for the edge, an edge rusher? Is there a defensive name we're not thinking of that might jump up into 10?
I'm guessing the names have been discussed a lot everywhere, not just in Chicago, but Micah Williams and Jalen Walker from Georgia, who, by the way, could not be more dissimilar in terms of prospect types. Micah Williams, I make this joke every time I talk about him. Like, if you told me he was starting at small forward for the Bulls tomorrow night, I'd believe it just because of the physical stature he has. That's not a Bulls joke. I know that they're still holding tight into a play-in spot here. So, but yeah, whatever. Name the NBA team. He just got this tremendous length. He had 14 sacks in his career. Never had a huge sack season. 5 was his most. But a really good player who has more upside than what he showed in the stat sheet at Georgia. Meanwhile, Jalen Walker was 6'1", 243 pounds at the combine. He's a short edge rusher, but he also has been a stand-up inside linebacker who was really productive and tied or led Georgia in sacks each of the past 2 seasons. Shamar Stewart's kind of the big swing player. He's from Texas A&M, and I mentioned how Micah Williams had just average production during his 3 seasons. He had 4, and then 5 sacks. Shamar Stewart, in 3 total seasons, had 4.5 sacks. 4.5 in 3 seasons for a guy who could go in the first, I think, 10 or 15 picks of the NFL draft. Exactly 1.5 sacks in each of those 3 seasons. Like, I just say this, it's going to take some serious stones from the GM that ends up taking Shamar Stewart in the first round. Not because I don't think it's worth it, but just understanding that, if it doesn't go well, it's going to be an easy pick for us to look back on and say, what were you thinking there, as opposed to some of the more proven commodities.
That is a great point. Field Yates for a couple more minutes with us. It's Carmen and Dionne's in for Yerk. It's ESPN 1000 and the ESPN Chicago app. From maybe just pure ability and versatility and maybe some X's and O's stuff you could do with him, if I were to say, all right, Field, compare and contrast Brock Bowers and Tyler Warren, would there be more comparisons, or are they vastly different players?
Yeah, they're vastly different players. I think Tyler Warren is tied with Ashton Jeanty as the best. They do it in such different ways that I'm calling it a tie. The best run-after-catch players, or run-after-the-ball-is-in-your-hands player in the entire draft. Travis Hunter would be in that vicinity as well. But Tyler Warren had 700 receiving yards after the catch last season.
That's
but
amazing.
You give him the ball, they were running wide receiver screens with this guy who's 6'5" and 255 pounds. This is going to sound, and I'm just using these players because they're so well known that people can more understand what I am getting at. This would be the highest end of scenarios. But if you were to kind of make the comparison for Brock Bowers, he's already, I guess, proven he has a chance to become this new version, this modern version of what Travis Kelce was for a long year. Tyler Warren, it's more on the Gronk archetype. I don't think he's quite as sudden as Gronk, and I don't think anybody that I've seen has been quite as powerful as Gronk. But that's more the analog, I think, than Travis Kelce for Tyler Warren. The guy had one of the best improved seasons of any prospect in the draft. Tyler Warren had more receiving yards last year than he did in his 3 seasons combined prior to that. He had 103 catches. It's truly ridiculous what he did in 2024, and it gives me confidence that he could be the leading pass catcher in an offense. Yes, it's a luxury pick for the Bears. I do think, though, that with Ben Johnson, and not that he was responsible primarily for picking the players in Detroit, but one thing that worked out really well for them is perhaps taking players that were viewed as luxuries, right? I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, they traded down from 6, but 12th overall after signing David Montgomery. Everybody was sitting there saying, what are you doing there? Well, Ben Johnson has already shown that he's as capable as anybody in terms of dialing up creative play calls for players. So I totally get where you're coming from, and the idea that the Bears have to eat their vegetables too and make sure they're insulating the offensive and defensive line. At the same time, I'm going to have a hard time with whoever, regardless of whether it's the Bears at 10 or someone at 5, 10, 15, wherever it is, taking Tyler Warren or Ashton Genty just because of the caliber of prospect that I believe each of them is.
All right, I was doing the exercise with these guys earlier, like a year ago, about June. ESPN.com, PFF, SI, Bleacher Nation. Everybody's got A+, B+, A- for the Bears. We're good at this, winning the offseason. One of these days it'll turn into winning an actual season. But that said, I feel like we're working ourselves up into a lather again. A lot of what they've done seemingly makes sense, but we've been here before. Like, is it different this time? And do you like what Ryan Poles has done so far?
I do like what they've done so far. It's very much meat and potatoes. I think I'm gonna borrow a sort of a tenor from our buddy Big Cat, who hate to see the streak come to an end last night, but I'm more proud of the 16-0. I'm not worried about the one. I'm more concerned about. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. Go 16-0. That's great, especially in that sector of sports. It's like you can have a little bit more of a reserved stance until you see it, right? But I also, I got to call it based off of, how I am seeing it relative to other moves that are made around the NFL. Like, I think this is a generally solid plan relative to what I thought the Bears needed to do this offseason. And I said this about the Panthers with Bryce Young last year, and after about 4 weeks of the season, it looked like kind of a clumsy stance. But I said that what the Panthers allowed themselves to do last year by insulating their offensive line, by really investing big, was it gave them a chance to credibly evaluate Bryce Young. Yeah. Now, there's still more work to be done, but I feel a lot better about Bryce Young now than I did at the beginning of last season, and certainly after week 4. I think the big part of that, he finally had some protection down the stretch. So not that I have doubts about Caleb Williams, but we're going to know much more about the ceiling of Caleb Williams by the end of this year than we did at the end of last year, just based off of how the offensive line now looks on paper, or the level of professionalism that you onboarded with not just Joe Thuney, but also Jonah Jackson and I think as well, and Drew Dahlman.
No, that was my question about Jonah Jackson. Is the understanding that a healthy Jonah Jackson can be as dominant as he was before last season?
Yeah, I think there's a chance there. I think I'm going to put my faith there in just in general in Ben Johnson. And by the way, it's not like a crazy astronomical amount of money. It sounds like, it's definitely a lot of money in the sense that there's $17 million to be paid out this year or something like that. 3 years, 51. I forget the exact number, but